This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street.
Well, welcome again, folks. This is Dr. Charles Parker here at Core Brain Journal, and we're very pleased. We have a mixed guy here who's a science guy and a practitioner who puts a lot of understanding together with laboratories, what's going on in the evolution of neuroscience. And we're pleased to welcome Dr. Chip Watkins to join us tonight. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you, Charles. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Well, thank you. Chip is, I'm going to do an intro, and then we're going to talk about him a little bit on a personal level, and then we're going to get down to what the real message is here tonight. Chip earned his medical degree at East Carolina School of Medicine, completed his internship and residency in family medicine at Florida Hospital in Orlando. In addition, he has a master's in public health, in health promotion and nutrition from Loma Linda University in Loma Linda, California, with experience in both academic and corporate medicine. Dr. Watkins built a thriving integrative medical practice in Greensboro, North Carolina, where my aunt and uncle live. His main focus is functional medicine with special interest in neurohormonal imbalances. We want to get into that. His other interests include many other aspects of integrative medicine, including nutrition, neuroendocrinology, and predictive genomics, or genomics, depending which part of the country you're from.
You say tomato, I say tomato.
So Dr. Watkins has lectured on a wide variety of topics at the local, state, national, and international levels. In addition, he's authored a number of journal articles and textbook chapters and has over 20 years of experience in private practice, teaching, and corporate medicine. So what's going to happen is we're going to have a download here at this particular episode. And Chip has put together a very interesting download, which you can get when you come over here. It's managing depression and anxiety, providing options and adjuncts to pharmaceutical treatments. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a different edge. So in final part of the introduction, Dr. Watkins joined UNESCO International's medical board in 2005, later became their medical director. And Dr. Watkins is currently serving as SONESCO's Chief Medical Officer and is also President and Laboratory Director at Neurolab, Inc. What a mouthful. You're a busy guy, Chip. So glad you could join us.
Well, it's just embarrassing.
Well, I think the thing is, when you get a sharp guy like yourself who knows what he's talking about, is really contributing to the evolution of patient care, it's great that you're in a position where you can affect more lives, where you can actually manage quality of care on a larger level. And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Yes. So, Chip, tell us a little bit about yourself on a personal level so we can get to know who you are, and then we'll talk a little more about what we're going to, the subject tonight.
Sure. Charles, I was trained as a kind of garden variety family practitioner. And that, not that there's anything wrong with that. I think family doctors are a wonderful group of people, and the folks that do primary care and serve patients, particularly rural and independent practices and small communities in our country, are they just don't get nearly enough credit for the work that they do. But for me, this all kind of started coming about, I guess, with patients bringing in articles from the internet and from newspapers and magazines and saying, Dr. Watkins, can I take coenzyme Q10 with my blood pressure medicine? And I'd go, I don't know. Can I take, L-arginine for my, ED or whatever?
Yeah, right.
I don't know. And I honestly, I got tired of saying I don't know. And so I started doing some research in herbal remedies and alternative therapies and started using those with patients. And I began to see that there was this other world of stuff and stuff that I had not been trained in that was, I'm not saying that everything was a panacea or there was any magic going on, but there was a different world, a world that I had not been exposed to at all as in traditional training. So, I began using these things with patients, and I think getting some pretty good results, and developed some protocols, and found a lot of success, particularly in chronic disease.
Yeah.
One patient sticks out in my mind who had rheumatoid arthritis and was really literally in a wheelchair. And we did some functional testing, did some gut stuff, and got her gut straightened out and cleaned up. And, she had pretty bad intestinal permeability and those sorts of things. And so we got that part straightened out, unloaded her, basically, of a lot of these toxins and a lot of the antigens that were flowing through her system. There's also a good bit of research in terms of gut organisms, and particularly in rheumatoid arthritis and Reiter syndrome and all these other types of connective tissue diseases, that actually there's this cross-reactivity between the protein coats in these bacteria and a lot of the connective tissue in the patient. So, anyway, worked on her gut, got her cleaned up, unloaded her toxins and so forth. And she sends me a Christmas card every year.
She's out of the wheelchair, I take it.
Yeah. And to hear her talk about walking on the beach with her kids and stuff, it's just amazing. And the really fun part of this job, as you well know, is really helping people get their lives back a lot of times.
That's true.
And it's incredibly gratifying, and I'm very grateful to be in the position that I've been in. So, it just kind of went from there, and I was in a group of family docs, and there were 6 of us at the time. And I've been in groups from 1 to 6 all through the career and every permutation. And so I'd been doing this a couple of years, and actually I think was probably referring patients and selling stuff out of the office occasionally, and giving patients these test boxes and stuff. And so at one point the principal at the family practice came to me and said, Chip, we don't exactly know what you're doing here.
Yeah, right.
And some of us find it intriguing and support you, and a couple of us don't. And we kind of feel that it would be better for you to maybe practice somewhere else. And I said, well, okay, because I had been doing some work with Great Smokies and had done some speaking with them, across the country and whatnot. And so I called up Great Smokies and asked a friend there, and he said, great. He said, their loss, our gains. They come on board. So then I became medical director at Great Smokies Lab in Asheville, and moved here to Asheville. So at that point, then, the world again opened up. And so, you begin to see there's so many options out there for patients. And to me, being an integrated physician really didn't matter what got my patient better. Sometimes it's a combination, right?
Yeah.
Of conventional stuff and physical therapy and the stuff we use. Mm-hmm. So, and so the neurotransmitter stuff just became a new, it's a piece of the puzzle, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it is the answer. This is the answer everybody's looking for. Well, it's not. But what it is a window into the patient's neuroendocrine system that we have heretofore not had, and I think that is what's exciting about it. It is not the answer, but it is a big piece of the puzzle, because for me, this neuroendocrine stuff, that's the money shot. Mm-hmm. That the interplay between hormones, the interplay between those neurotransmitters, and how that works on every level, from our central nervous system to our peripheral nervous system to every system that we have. So, and it was huge, and it continues to be. That's an important part of everything I do.
Now, Chip, were you doing that neuroscience testing, the neurotransmitter testing, with Great Smokies?
No, that was not part of our panel. Mm-hmm. I found out about that from my own practice and working with patients. And I'm not sure if it was a patient that brought it to me or one of my partners in the new practice. But I started doing it and started saying, this is important stuff. This is stuff that we really, again, it was a window that I'd not had before, and it started answering some things. I mean, particularly in you had mentioned, I think, the little thing that we did on alternatives and adjuncts to treating depression. So, and that's exactly where I see this. I mean, so many of our patients walk through the door with sleep problems and anxiety problems and depression, and you ask yourself, well, in a integrated practice, do most of the patients that I see have mild depression, moderate depression, or severe depression, right? I would say most of them are probably mild to moderate, right? So they're not the super severe type of depression. And what we see from the medical literature is that actually these antidepressants really only work on those, markedly depressed patients. When you get down to the mild to moderate, there's really no difference between placebo and drug in a lot of those studies. So, I think having safer alternatives for patients and more natural things to help address some of these issues is an important piece.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Particularly things that have been on the market and have been used in the marketplace for over 30 years, things like 5-HTP and theanine and these sorts of things. So, yeah.
So, listeners, what Chip is talking about here is, in fact, measuring neurotransmitters. We were taken a little bit for granted there because, Chip and I know each other a little bit and we're on the same path. But I think one of the things that's really very important about his work at Senesco, I don't know so much about Great Smokies, but certainly at Senesco, is the fact that company is one of the leaders in neurotransmitter testing, which is really evaluating the actual foundation of what people are being given medications for. The way I think about it is like chickens in the ranch. If there are no chickens in the ranch and you're sending chicken catchers in, which the meds are in fact chicken catchers, if you send chicken catchers into an empty chicken ranch, they are going to come out empty-handed. That is the bottom line. Now, that's one part of it. You can also send chicken catchers into chicken ranches too loaded with chickens. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But this is what Dr. Watkins is talking about, folks, is measuring neurotransmitters.
Where are you from, Charles, originally?
I caught chickens as a kid. That was part of what I did. Northern Indiana, I had a chicken catching jacket, a chicken catching hat, and when I wasn't baling hay, I was catching chickens.
Well, I mean, the typical story that we hear from a patient as an integrative doc, a patient walks in the door and says, Doc, I'm depressed, and I've been depressed for a long time. Well, tell me a little bit more about that. Well, doctor put me on Zoloft, doctor put me on Prozac, doctor put me on Paxil, doctor put me on all these different things, and well, how'd that work? Well, the typical story is, I'm depressed. Okay, well, let's give you this 20 milligrams of Prozac. 3, 6, 9, 12 months later, patient comes in and says, Doc, that Prozac that you gave me, it seemed to help at first, but now it doesn't seem to be working so well. Well, what does the doctor do? Well, let's increase it. You just need to increase the dose from 20 to 40. 3, 6, 9, 12 months later, patient comes back and says, it doesn't seem to be working. Well, let's increase it to 80. Then the patient comes back and says, doctor, the depression seems to be a little bit better, but I have no sex life and I have no sex drive and I really don't care anymore. And so the doctor goes, well, you need Wellbutrin because that's going to help you with your dopamine. And nowadays, the next thing is, we have to add Abilify, or we have to, one of these atypical antipsychotics for patients that aren't getting better. And invariably, if you look at these patients at their neurotransmitter levels, they're invariably low. For somebody that has been on, say, an SSRI or an NRI for a long, long time, particularly over, I'd say, at least a year or two, you routinely see their levels of serotonin very, very low. Why is that? Well, these things are reuptake inhibitors. So more of the drug stays in the synapse longer, and just by passive diffusion if you will, leaks out of the system. So what you end up doing is, like you're saying, you end up, flogging a dead horse. Or a sick horse anyway. So you just add side effects as you add, medications, and as you add the dosages to try to flog these people back into what where they need to be. And what they actually need is actually some substrate for that medication to work on. That is, what they need is, if it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what they actually need is to build their levels of serotonin back up. So what you see then is, and I'm not saying, to anyone out there, stop your SSRI and start 5-HTP. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that in order for that medication to work, it has to have something to work on. And when you are depleted in these substances, the only way that we can fill that tub back up, or that we can refill that tank of serotonin, is through diet, through L-tryptophan and milk and turkey and whatever, but you have to eat a lot of turkey. So things like 5-HTP are very, very helpful actually at refilling that tank. When the patient has something for that medication to work on, the medication works better. So invariably, and we may not be able to get the patient completely off of medication, and one of the reasons is, I believe with all my heart, that these medications actually change the neural pathways. They actually cement, if you will, kind of these neural pathways. And so that it's very difficult to get patients off of, particularly some, as some of you in the audience well know, difficult to get off some of these medications worse than others. But yeah, so by actually giving a little bit of substrate and actually filling the tank back up, and again, the only thing to do that, these drugs do not fill the tank of serotonin. They're reuptake inhibitors, so they actually plug the leak, but they don't do anything to fill the bathtub up, if you will. So again, you may not be able to get the patient off of the drug completely, but invariably, I've used that word a lot.
I like that word. That's a good one. It does happen.
Yeah, I mean, very consistently, what you find is that patients will be able to lower their dose on the medication if you give them something for the drug to work on, which is a good thing. If you can get by on 10 milligrams of Prozac versus 80, I think that's a good thing, So anyway.
Well, the combination works. And I think what's really cool about this is what Senesco does is they will turn back. You can urinate in a cup, send it off, and really get very clear levels of what's going on with brain levels through the urine. Now, I'm going to add this real quickly that Dr. Watkins has also put together a series of 120 peer-reviewed articles. Some people say, well, this is totally flaky. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. It's not accurate. It's not valid. And I'm speaking for Dr. Watkins right now. I mean, I'll be interested in his remark about this, but no one is saying anything is 100%. But if we can improve care by measuring more precisely imbalances that are occurring that are not previously measured, and we can actually see what's going on, what is wrong with that? That is a good thing. Now, no one's saying it's 100%, but I've seen it in my own practice, Chip, and I know you've seen it because you're doing it. Yeah, you see it all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the message. And again, not that this is a cure for depression or a cure for anxiety for all patients. Depression, as we know, even the monoamine theory of depression, has come into question at times. Now, a great deal of research continues on the monoamine theory of depression, but we're beginning to see that other things like inflammation, certainly toxins, things like BDNF or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that is increased with exercise, and we know that exercise improves depression, and one of the reasons is that we increase our BDNF. So again, BDNF is a great thing to talk about in terms of just actually healing the brain. So and again, I'm not pushing this test off as any kind of a diagnostic test even, but what it is for a clinician is, I think, is an excellent clinical tool. Yeah. So it helps the clinician. It's almost like a guidepost, right? It's like tells you which way to go, and we do the test, we get a set of numbers, we do an intervention, patient comes back, we repeat the test, and so I mean that to me is a good clinical tool, and that's how I use the test, and that's kind of how I talk about the test, really.
Well, so then the next level is taking that to the additional level is when you have, and this is where the real nuances, the learning, and the evolution of experience takes place, is how do you use neurotransmitter precursors to fill that bathtub, to put some things in that synapse that are going to work, so when the medications come in to block the reuptake, there's something that it can block as opposed. So what's your thought about using neurotransmitter precursors, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. Well, if you go to PubMed or one of the medical literature sites, probably even Google Scholar, but you can kind of look about these precursor molecules, and there was a lot of research done in the 60s and 70s on this monoamine theory of depression, and a lot of those early studies were done with 5-HTP and L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine and D-L-phenylalanine, and these precursor amino acids that actually then produce. So it goes. The cascade is L-tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, serotonin, melatonin in that pathway, in that particular pathway. So there was a lot of research done on this. And then, Prozac was born, I think, in 1982 because the pharmaceutical companies looked at that research and went, aha, whoa, boy, we got a wild one here. So a lot of money went into developing these drugs. And currently, I think the last time I checked about maybe less than a year ago, there was 24 of these SSRIs and SNRIs on the market now. Mm-hmm. So how much different are they? I don't know, but they all kind of do that same thing. But so using these precursor molecules has a good history, and look at women with postmenopausal women who have hot flashes now. You probably are aware of the literature on things like Paxil and Effexor as non-hormonal treatments for hot flashes. Well, those drugs are not affecting sex hormones; they're affecting the neurohormones. And my experience, and I believe yours too, has been that as we balance the neurotransmitters in these ladies, very often, not always, but very often, they're actually able to do with a lot less estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, than they were without the neurotransmitter balances, because these things really, really do affect sex hormones as well. So.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I would love to learn a little bit from you in that regard. Do you have, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're a little bit of a resource here, and tease it out. How does that actually take place with an antidepressant? Well, let's back up a second. How does a neurotransmitter precursor like L-tryptophan affect estrogen, for example?
Not sure if I can give you an honest answer right off the top of my head, but I think the message to me is that a woman is not a silo, right? She's not a series of silos. She's not her nervous system and her gynecological system and her GI system. She is all of those things all at once. And all of those things are interrelated. And to me, that's the message as an integrated physician, is as I fill the tanks on these neurotransmitters, and those things interact with all of those neurohormonal pathways, and it actually makes the whole system work better. That's how I kind of think of it in my mind. Maybe we need to sit down and do a literature search over a beer or something, but But that's kind of how I look at the whole system, right?
Your clinical experience is that it really does work. Is the bottom line? If you get those neurotransmitter systems right, then that whole experience of hot flashes and neurohormonal dysregulation improves.
Yeah, and the same thing goes on with men with erectile dysfunction and dopamine, right? So without adequate dopamine, you're going to have some serious trouble. So, and a lot of the drugs that work are actually dopamine reuptake inhibitors and those. So all of these things interact and play off one another to a great extent.
So then, how do you actually measure or interpret? Like, for example, let's say a person has a low serotonin when they're measured, and they're not on any medication, but they somehow have another one of the neurotransmitters is high. Are you able to bring something down as well as bring something up with neurotransmitter precursors?
Yeah, what a great question. Yeah. These things work actually very, very hard. The system works to balance itself, to come to a point of homeostasis, right? So the typical patient will have, low levels of inhibitory neurotransmitters such as serotonin and GABA, and typically will have, more elevated norepinephrine and epinephrine. These are more excitatory, or even glutamate. Now, a lot of times that's due to diet. We know there's a connection between a high sugar diet and low serotonin because, right? I mean, so carbohydrates make us feel better. I kind of wish they didn't, but so right. I mean, so you've had patients on the Atkins diet, right, or a very, very low carbohydrate diet. I mean, many of them, not all of them, but many of them over time feel pretty crappy. They feel tired and they become a little bit depressed and just their mood is just off because they're not eating any carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, particularly simple carbohydrates, actually raise serotonin levels pretty quickly, and they go in parallel with the sugar. Now, you get on that sugar roller coaster with simple sugars, right? So the sugar goes up, insulin pours out, sugar crashes. So people get on this roller coaster, and that's not good on so many levels. But the fact remains that carbohydrates and particularly sugars really do help our mood. I mean, that's why we reach for the screaming yellow zonkers when we have a bad day, or a glass of wine, as the case may be, or whatever. But all those things will tend to raise our blood sugar levels. So
I didn't know that. That's very interesting that it brings up that serotonin. And then, of course, when it dissipates, which is going to do in a matter of hours, you're going to have a drop because you got a lift. You actually had a mild antidepressant effect.
Exactly.
That just dissipated once the carbohydrate is metabolized successfully.
And again, that it's the similar process. I think of what goes on with the medications is that over time, that cycle over and over again, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. You actually use up a lot of your serotonin there, and which is why we see a lot of patients come in who are mildly depressed, who have very low serotonin levels. And I think a lot of that has to do with our high sugar diet in America. And I was thinking back. I mean, I do have a number of articles, particularly in the one that you'd mentioned on the validity of urinary neurotransmitter testing. But one thing that comes to mind is the study that looked at estrogen actually being nature's SSRI. Estrogen actually hits those serotonin receptors. So they're actually, it's the serotonin A1 receptor, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and certainly the folks are welcome to take a look at those articles too. But yeah.
See, that's totally interesting, because then what happens is what you and I are interested in is treatment failure, really. Because really what we see on our practice is treatment failure. What we want to do is we want to figure out how to do something about it. And the next issue is, what are the combos to make these? What are the cofactors? And we could talk all night about cofactors, but I think just because we know a little bit about this, I mean, I know a little bit, you know a lot more than I do about it. Let's talk a little bit about the cofactors while we're thinking about neurotransmitter precursors. And one other thing I want to ask you about while we're talking about it is, what is your thought? I have my own, but I'm interested in your thought about using neurotransmitter precursors with an antidepressant. What's your thought about that?
Well, the preacher's done stopped preaching and gone to meddling. That's a tough question, because I don't want to come across as giving patients permission to mix these things. I mean, all this needs to be done under your physician's care, for sure.
Yes.
Having said that, I do it all the time. Right. So, I mean, that's that piece now. And we've also done a literature search on 5-HTP causing serotonin syndrome in SSRIs. Now, that's something that some of the audience probably knows about. But it's when you get too much serotonin. And so whenever you talk to a psychiatrist in particular about using 5-HTP and SSRIs, don't do it. Well, actually, there's no reason to tell people that. I mean, from my search of the the literature, there's no, when people get serotonin syndrome is when physicians mix two serotonin drugs, whether that be a migraine drug and a antidepressant, or two different types of antidepressants, those types of things. But 5-HTP really seems to be quite safe. And I remember a patient who came in one time who was bipolar, actually, and they're difficult patients. But he was on, I think, 5 medications to affect his mood, and because his wife was into natural products, he was on 600 milligrams of 5-HTP a day, and and his serotonin level was in the 9,000s, and I was like, whoa! If I was ever going to see serotonin syndrome, I'd see it in this guy. But I mean, I say that to say I think in general these things are quite safe under a physician's watchful eye. But yeah, we use them all the time, and that's where that piece that I was talking about a little bit earlier is that if you've been on these medications and you've been on them for a long time, I would almost guarantee you that the serotonin levels are going to be quite low.
Yes.
And so by giving that patient some 5-HTP allows that drug, some substrate for that drug to work on, and most of the time you can get that patient down to a lower level of drug, which again is a good thing.
Well, the other thing, of course, that we're talking about here is why not measure it in the front end and actually see the target? If the target is there, as you said a moment ago, you got these inhibitory neurotransmitters are all low. What would be wrong with actually using the two together? You'd be putting, to use my metaphors, you'd put some chickens in the ranch, and you got the chicken catchers in there at the same time. That would be reasonable, and it would be documented, and this would be where you would, as you said a moment ago, defer to the medical authority. This would be a good reason for a physician to know what the neurotransmitter levels actually are. And then they could go in and they could talk to you and talk to somebody down at Senesco and get it right on the front end.
Yeah, that would be a very, very good thing. No doubt about it.
So tell me a little bit. I was reading also in your material here. I was interested in some of the products that you had, but I was really just interested not to name a product necessarily, but to look at some of the cofactors, as we were talking about a moment ago, with the neurotransmitters. What could you tell us a little bit about some general remarks about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about 5-HTP and theanine and dopamine precursors and these sorts of things like L-tyrosine or D-L-phenylalanine. Those are amino acids, but I think what Dr. Parker's talking about are the mineral and vitamin cofactors that are necessary in the production and metabolism of all of these neurotransmitters. So you have things like your B vitamins in particular, B12, B6, certainly are huge in this piece. Folate, very important. Magnesium, a number of things. And, when we talk about magnesium or copper or those types of things, heavy metals are another piece in terms of this teasing out what this puzzle is. Sometimes those heavy metals will interact very strongly with those cofactors. Mm-hmm. In other words, they take space up as opposed to being a two valent magnesium. You'll get a heavy metal in there, mercury or a lead or aluminum, and they actually block those spaces where the magnesium or copper would go, which can wreak havoc on your nervous system. And a lot of times people that have ongoing mood issues are also have a toxic overload that has to be unloaded. I think I mentioned that term a little bit earlier in the talk. Yeah.
So let me ask you, now we're on that. Let's talk about Senesco a little bit. We know you do neurotransmitter testing, and it just occurred to me, do you do mineral analysis as well, like hair analysis or any kind of work like that?
Right. Well, so at Senesco, we have been very laser focused in really keeping with that HPAT axis. And when I say that, it's the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid axis. And that really is our sweet spot. Now, we work with a lot of integrative physicians, DOs, DCs, naturopaths. So, yeah, I mean, someone who's trained in integrative medicine should know how to look at that gut, or to look at those heavy metals, or to look at, all those types of other tests. But we're pretty much focused on that HPAT axis. However, I will say, I don't want to say too much, but very exciting. The more I've read about the gut and how important the gut is to actually making neurotransmitters and metabolizing neurotransmitters, it's truly phenomenal. So look for us in the not too distant future to have some things to really help with that. I mean, because I just feel that that is a frontier that's not been explored. And I think, I mean, there are studies now that actually using certain strains of lactobacillus or bacillus that actually can be an adjunct to antidepressants and treating depression and anxiety. Pretty amazing.
Yes, you have a great woman, and she doesn't come to my mind right now, but she used to work with neuroscience. She lives down there in Asheville. You probably know who she is, but she was talking about the microbiota forming brain-derived neurotropic factor. And
yes. Yeah.
Her name doesn't occur to me right now, but that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's important stuff.
Yeah. And if you can measure that, and then you can come in the back door in a very, very constructive way, because you're not really harming the microbiome. You're actually facilitating the microbiome to do what it needs to do.
Right. And again, it's I think part of it has to do with living in our toxic environment, that the right bacteria. I mean, we know the relationship of a lot of different bacteria and obesity, for instance. I mean, it's incredible what we've done to ourselves with so much of our processed food and the heavy metals and the toxins and all the things that we do to our gut to destroy that. But I digress. But it is fascinating. It is a fascinating area and a very important area, and I think probably an area in the future that medicine will be going, I hope.
Oh, it will be. There's no question about it. Chip, listen, you did a little teaser without even realizing it, and because you were just talking, but I want to invite you back sometime in the future here to really talk about that hypothalamic pituitary, that entire axis situation, because I know you're an expert on it. I know you know about those interrelationships, and they're absolutely relevant for individuals who have any kind of chronic illness. I mean, chronic illness is tied up with every single one of those subsets. And so it'd be great to hear your thoughts about that. And I'd welcome you coming back again, and we'll just focus on that axis and get something talked about there.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, that to me is really the money shot, that whole axis there. And we will be bringing on thyroid testing in the not too distant future. And one of the great things that we do at Senesco, I think for both patients and clinicians, is our correlation analysis. So patients do a patient questionnaire. They rank their symptoms 1 to 4. And then we do the testing, and then we correlate those symptoms to their test results. So we'll be adding thyroid in the not too distant future. And again, there's this huge interplay and web-like interactions between the thyroid and the sex hormones and the adrenal hormones and the neurohormones. So that's a very exciting piece that should be coming out pretty soon too.
So that piece of material, when I forget what the word was, that consensus, correlation. So it pulls together. Does it make specific recommendations to that physician for that patient?
Well, the correlation, you've probably done enough of these tests that you don't look at the correlation analysis anymore. But yeah, because after a doc does about 50 of them, you kind of go, oh, I know kind of how to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with the correlation analysis can be 2 or 3 pages, and it again takes the patient's symptoms. For instance, sleep issues, and the patient had a 3 in terms of insomnia maybe, and so then it correlates their low serotonin. Patient had low serotonin. This can be associated with sleep difficulties, and so we do that whole 2 or 3 pages, and then we'll make recommendations at the end. So that sets us apart, I think, from really any other certainly lab but it gives the patient and the doctor a lot of information.
Well, it's great because, that's something that we all have trouble with no matter where we are in practice, is not only telling the patient right there what's going on because they're confused. They don't have a MD or PhD in neurotransmitters. And if they have a paper to take home that they can study and think about, that's got some references, and that's one of the reasons we're doing Core Brain Journal, because it gives a person a little more insight, get the language down, think about these things, and then they're better educated and they become more involved with participatory medicine, and they become a semi-professional right there talking to you, and they could tell us how to do it with them.
Well, it's just like any other health behavior change, right? If there's more buy-in from the patient and the patient understands what's going on with them better, they're going to follow through better and their outcomes are going to be better because they're actually going to go on with the plan that you and they come up with. I mean, I cannot tell you, Dr. Parker, the number of patients who have seen these results and held them in their hand and actually broke down in tears, and you probably had this happen too, and said, why didn't my doctor ever do this test? Now I understand why I feel the way I feel. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge breakthrough for patients, and it's very exciting and fun.
I'm totally with you, 1,000%. I really appreciate you taking the time, Chip. Thanks so much for being on. We're going to have you again. And for those of you who are wondering where Chip is talking from, what's the actual URL? It's UNESCO. What's the URL for your company?
I believe it is UNESCO.com.
You do it all the time, right? You live there. How could you possibly know the answer to that question?
I don't know.
But I'll have it in the show notes, folks. We're going to have it there so you can get a hold of Dr. Watkins. We're going to have Dr. Watkins' PDF download, and we're going to have that excellent, 120 peer-reviewed references on the things that we're talking about. Data makes a difference.
Give me my cell phone number. That'd be great.
No, we won't be asking you for that, Chipper. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.